In July 2024, the Lonarc Oboe Trio and Lonarc Double Reed Musicians sit down to talk with eminent oboist and composer Edwin Roxburgh. We discuss the music we've been rehearsing recently for our IDRS tour in America. Edwin's shadow play, written in 1984 for oboe trio, and Went's Quartetto, Concertante in B-flat major, composed 200 years before. We also discussed Voyager, a work Edwin composed for the 1989 IDRS convention, which was held in Manchester. This work is scored for double reed nonet, and that's 3 oboes, 3 cor anglais and 3 bassoons. We plan to introduce this work into our future concerts, where we shall also be performing the octets that Went composed in the late 1780s. And we discussed with great enthusiasm the new Scottish-style oboe trio that Edwin is composing for us, which we plan to record alongside shadow play and the 2 Beethoven oboe trios early in 2025, and we shall also then take on tour. What does shadow play mean to you?
Well, shadow play means it's a game where one party copies what the other party is saying or doing, and they seem to sort of make a kind of pattern of events where one is following the other. And with the trio, what actually happens is that all the musical events are based on that kind of canon. You know, with three people doing similar things, but only a shadow in relation to the initial statement of the idea. So I found it an interesting way of structuring a piece out of something which is so uncertain as shadow play.
We've got a score here of Voyager, which you wrote in the 80s.
Yep.
I believe Robin Cantor commissioned it. And what I find fascinating about this, having been involved in the 18th century Wind Harmonie music of the Schwarzenbergs, which has the lineup of the 2 oboes, the 2 cor anglais, the 2 bassoons, and then the 2 horns, is that you wrote Voyager for 3 oboes, 3 cor anglais, and 3 bassoons. And so it's very much going to fit in with our repertoire. And just looking at the score initially, it seems as if it's similar in style to shadow play.
There are some characteristics which are similar, yes.
Yeah.
Mainly sections where there's no time signature, and you know, the players play something quite freely, but nonetheless using the same material. Yeah. So there is a kind of you know, it's not avoiding the issue of harmonic structure, but it's rather like that rather than like that. Okay. And I hope that makes sense. So that, you know, the notes one uses don't create constant harsh dissonance all the time. You know, and I think the flow of the ideas and the speed of the notes as well, but always coming to a sustained element where everyone joins together.
I'd like to sort of turn the conversation, if we can, more now to the Went and this quartet that we're also playing. And what I thought was interesting, or struck me the other day, is Joe in the rehearsal was asking us to be mindful of the fact that we've got little themes canonically, which we're passing around each other in the Went quartet. And it's, you know, how much has changed from the 18th century to the 20th, and it's rather nice to see this. So, do you want to talk about our Went quartetto?
We've spent a lot of trouble here making us scores, and these are the first scores ever done. A score means you can study the whole piece, you can follow the harmony, you can follow the instrumentation, and you realise the skill of someone like Went. We were very lucky that Martin in Český Krumlov sent us photocopies of parts in his library that Went himself had signed off on. So they're parts written in the 18th century, and we've used those parts to clean off all the stuff that was in the old edition. we're grateful to the old edition because we meant that we knew that this piece even exists.
There was also quite an interesting process because with any sort of handwritten manuscript, you're going to have inconsistencies just due to the time period potentially changing of a mind between writing out parts by hand versus writing out the score. And so I think in our process of generating this clean new score, we really had to get into the mindset of what his intent was,
Yes.
what was intentional in terms of inconsistencies, what wasn't, and make the most musical decisions sort of based on that. I mean, it's a tricky thing as well because quite a lot of the markings that he's written by modern musical standards mean something completely different. And so I think, Joe went very in depth with his performance practice notes at the start just to inform the performers how to do it in the way that Went would have wanted it back in the day. And we've kept those markings consistent with the manuscript as well.
Yeah. Edwin's very kindly turned up and sort of stand in the background and given us some really interesting input into his own piece. But also listening to the Went, I was really struck by what you said, that it sounds like Haydn. He's a very good composer. Like when you say it's canonic, when you've got the score and we've taken all this trouble to write a score, you guys, to write a score, you see it, all this beautiful composition where the duets sort of shift all the time. It's beautifully instrumented and orchestrated, if you like, harmonically very interesting. And, well, as I said in my thing, it's been a labour of love and a revelation to spend all this time with the Český Krumlov parts, which are very clean and basically in Wendt's hand. And then make a score and then see what you sort of feel the hand of Went in that, in making a new score.
This is the very first double reed quartet.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, when you think of the number of string quartets that have been written.
Nice, yeah.
And, you know, I've tried to find other 18th century double reed quartets, but there aren't any. There are some, I think that everything that's been done nowadays is an arrangement. And it'll either be for oboes and bassoons, but very rarely is it for oboe, oboe d'amore, cor anglais, and bassoon. And in fact, it was originally written for oboe grande in G.
Oboe grande in G, which was an instrument, basically a large oboe, from the Baroque period. It came in various keys, apparently, but it died out towards the end of the classical period. But it's not to be confused with the cor anglais in G, although it's the same pitch. It is just a large oboe. There were also d'amores, of course, in the Baroque period, but a slightly different sound. I would imagine the oboe grande has a slightly more strident sound than a d'amore. But as there are no modern day oboe grandes.
Equivalent. And one of my thoughts was, you know, the Schwarzenbergs were keen patrons of music. And I'm sure if you were a canny instrument maker, you would, you know, make contact with the Schwarzenbergs or through maybe Went and go, look, I've made this new instrument, you know, why don't you? Because Triebensee's oboe trios, a couple of them when we saw in 2018 in the library, we've only known them as for two oboes and cor anglais, but in fact they were written for oboe, oboe grande and cor anglais. This Wind Harmonie, which I feel has been neglected for too long, that's had, like say, a 200-year Sleeping Beauty moment, and we need to revive it. But it is interesting, the history, that it came from the military bands that actually started in Baroque times. This military influence is interesting, and how all the courts would, if you were a musician in the 18th century, you had to have two jobs. So if you were a string player, you were a servant, but if you were a wind player, you were in the military. And because Napoleon was approaching and you know, everyone was a little bit concerned, they definitely looked after their military. And then because they were also becoming a little bit more sophisticated in Vienna, all these courts had their wind harmonies, and the Schwarzenberg harmony and the Imperial harmony were the two major harmonies. And
a harmony is a wind ensemble.
Yes, in the wind ensemble. I want to start incorporating these octet, these not just oboe trio music, but we have a concert where we've also got a larger ensemble, because they're part of this, you know, the oboe trio came out of these ensembles, I think. You can purchase the score and parts for this Quartetto Concertante in B-flat major for from the Lonarc Oboe Trio website by following the link Lonarc Publishing Sheet Music, and that's at www.lonarcoboetrio.com/shop. We will be publishing more oboe trios and octets over the coming months. This autumn, the Lonarc Foundation has its annual fundraising concert. We will be raising monies for the Lonarc Foundation and the Royal Corps of Army Music Trust Fund, honouring the roots of classical wind harmony that evolved from the military wind bands of the 18th century. The concert will be on the afternoon of Remembrance Sunday, which this year is on the 10th of November, and we shall play in the Swedenborg Hall just off Bloomsbury Square in London. The programme will include works for oboe trio, double reed quartet and octet. We will play music by the 18th century composers Josef Triebensee and Johan Went, contrasted with music by Edwin Roxburgh and an arrangement of Leroy Anderson's 1948 Saraband by Gary Carpenter, which has been commissioned by the Lonarc Foundation. We are very fortunate that both composers will be present, so if you come you will be able to meet them. Tickets can be purchased from the Eventbrite website. You can find the link via the Lonarc Oboe Trio website in the concert diary section or in the info section below this video.